William Castle is often seen as the king of gimmick cinema, a title I personally would say he's deservedly earned. Indeed, from about 1958 right up to the mid-60s, at least at a premiere level, his films were total event cinema. And his mixture of Hitchcock-esque direction, the horror of the early Universal monster movies, and a dab of pure theatricality was what made his movies such a joy to go and see in the cinema. To the uninitiated, gimmick cinema is generally when a film is marketed around a particular theme or gimmick. In the 20th century, this was generally 3D or some variation therein. But more nuanced directors would expand on this through the 20th century. John Waters sold polyester on Odorama, which was basically scratch and sniff cards that allowed you to smell the movie, which was neat. Other directors in the past have offered cash prizes or made the audience sign waivers in case of their death from fright. Castle was an innovator though, and even though it was a very brief window with which he experimented, he was almost always trying to take the world of film into new and interesting places. What Castle was doing wasn't strictly an original venture. Spook Shows had been around from the 1920s through to the mid to late 40s, but they worked slightly differently to Castle's visions. Those shows would generally either be just theatre shows or theatre shows that happened to have a movie playing in the middle of them. Often it would be something like, "Come and see Dr. Bloodwrench. He'll saw a girl in half. He'll hypnotise your boyfriend and turn him into a gorilla." They were often harmless enough fun, but they'd chuck on something like The Mad Monster to pad the show out while being described as an adults-only show. You'd probably be able to take your 6-year-old to them without raising much of a flinch by modern standards. Castle's films were much more interwoven with the gimmick. Rather than it being a live-on-stage performance, then a film for padding, then a final stage performance before curtain down, here the gimmicks were often continuously present or a key feature of the movie-watching experience. For example, The House on Haunted Hill featured a moment where a skeleton on a wire would fly over the audience's heads in the cinema once a specific cue in the film was called. Or Homicidal featured a countdown clock allowing members of the audience who were of a nervous disposition to leave the cinema before the gory shock ending. If they did leave during this time, they'd be ushered into the Coward's Corner, where they'd receive a certificate calling them a full-blown coward and they'd receive a full refund. A lot of these gimmicks didn't survive much outside of the initial screenings. It must be stressed that realistically, by the time these films had gone past the premiere and maybe the first week or so of release, the gimmicks wouldn't be utilised at all, really. Often Castle's films would be recut to remove the audience participation or gimmick element to make it less noticeable to audiences that they were ever even present at all. But the fact that a major studio like Columbia Pictures would humour Castle on this for as long as they did was astoundingly brave of them. And today's movie featured what was possibly his best integrated gimmick of all time. 1960's 13 Ghosts is about as William Castle as you can get when it comes to his filmography. It's a horror that at the time would have been suitable for families with older children, 10+, but by modern standards feels like one of the hokiest ghost train rides you've ever been on in your life, but in the best possible way. This film's main gimmick was Illusiono, basically a form of two-colour film processing that worked very similar to 3D movies but with a slight variance. So the idea was that before you went into the film, you'd be given an Illusiono card. It was a viewing screen with one red filter and one blue filter. At the beginning of the film, Castle explains that the film features several super spooky ghosts throughout the film, and that the Illusiono device was created by the now deceased Professor Zorba in order to view ghosts that generally couldn't be seen by the naked eye. The idea was simple. If you wanted to see the ghosts when the film stock turned blue, you look through the red part of the viewer and you'd see a spooky ghost. If you don't want to be terrified, then you can look through the blue part of the viewer and the ghosts would disappear completely. The technique was quite simply done. Specific portions of the film were processed in the two-colour film stock format, with the majority of the frame tinted blue, but the ghosts processed in a faint red colour. When you use the Illusiono viewer, or a pair of 3D glasses if you can't get your hands on a viewer 60-ish years after they stopped making them, Looking through the red portion emphasises the red colour processing of the ghosts, making them look much more visible, clearer and vivid. Looking through the blue portion minimises that faint red outline of the ghosts even further, to the point where they almost become completely invisible. It's a fun little trick that drastically improves the overall watchability of this picture, and Castle was very shrewd to hook in audiences by giving them the choice of the blue filter. The idea being that the ghosts were so terrifying that he was taking mercy on you by giving you the choice to watch the film without seeing such terrifying images. As I mentioned earlier, Castle's gimmicks didn't tend to last long past the premiere, mainly for the cost of manufacturing, setups and booking out theatre lobbies. So while Illusiono did have a brief run in cinemas, ultimately after a couple of weeks the film was recut to remove any mention of Illusiono card viewers, and the film was reprocessed into bog standard black and white where the ghosts are viewable no matter what, though in my experience they aren't quite as clear or pronounced outside of the Illusiono cut. The black and white cut of this film is okay. I mean, it's still the same movie, but if you're going to check this one out, try and get your hands on the Illusiono cut. The audience participation elements are wonderfully cheesy and really take the movie to the next level in terms of enjoyment. Anyway, I've waffled on long enough about Quasi 3D. What's the film about anyway? Well, the film follows the Zorba family. Husband Cyrus is a lecturer who hosts events at a local museum, and his family consists of his down-to-earth wife Hilda and their 2 children, teenage daughter Medea and young son Buck. Times are hard for the Zorba family, and in particular money is a rare commodity. In fact, the film opens with Hilda calling Cyrus at work to tell him he's missed a loan payment and that they're taking away the last of the furniture. Things are looking pretty bleak, but it's Buck's birthday, so the family try to remain chipper. Buck wishes for a house with permanent furniture when he blows out the candles on his cake, and literally the moment he does that, a creepy ghoul arrives at the door with a telegram informing the Zorba family to attend a solicitor's office the next day as a matter of urgency. It transpires that Cyrus's uncle, a famous doctor in the field of paranormal photography, has gone to meet his maker and left the Zorba family a sprawling, dilapidated mansion and all of his worldly possessions, including specifically a pair of super neato funky looking glasses. Overjoyed at the prospect of a free house, they quickly move in, but are immediately met with a few problems. First and foremost, the house is a resting site for 12 unruly spirits, and a chance encounter with a Ouija board releases that evil all over the mansion. More frustratingly, one of the terms of the Zorbas inheriting the house is that once they move in, they can't sell up or leave. If they do, the house automatically becomes the property of the state and will be changed into a public park. So the gang decide to stay, despite repeated warnings both from the solicitor and Dr. Zorba's previous housekeeper Elaine, who try both in vain to warn the family to leave and save themselves. The night after the ghosts are stirred, Cyrus is mooching about the house when he finds a secret passage and a faint wailing noise. Following the noise, he arrives at a hard metal handleless door which mysteriously slides open, revealing a laboratory of sorts. Inside the lab, the wailing is significantly louder, and when Cyrus puts on Dr. Zorba's glasses, the lab suddenly springs to life with terrifying spirits who burst into flames, and a book on one of the lab's tables erupts with an emblazoned 13 on it. Cyrus takes the book to a local museum where a friend helps to translate it, and it's revealed that Dr. Zorba's life was quite a dark one. He developed lenses that were capable of capturing images of ghosts, and over the years he was able to transfer these lenses into a pair of glasses. He then used these glasses to travel the globe hunting down ghosts from Italy to Tibet to London and many, many more places before relocating said ghosts inside his mansion. The ghosts slowly drove him insane and destroyed his body, tearing at his face and torso till he was a shadow of his former self. As a final act, he withdrew all his assets, converted them into cash and hid them somewhere before suffocating under mysterious circumstances. Both the solicitor, Ben, and Elaine the housekeeper spent days searching the mansion looking for Dr. Zorba's fortune, but it never materialised. And when Ben starts dating Medea and Buck starts getting a little too comfortable with the spectral inhabitants of the mansion, things begin to take a turn for the sinister and super spooky, as the film changes gear into one hell of a ghost train ride with twists and turns that'll spook the kids and enthrall the parents. This really is one not to be missed. The script's a bit of an interesting one to break down, really, because in and of itself, it's not really a particularly deep story. What I've described just basically makes up about the first 2 acts of this movie, and literally as soon as Zorba's fortune is mentioned in this, it might as well literally become a ghost train ride. Most of the scenes involve our characters walking into a room, seeing a ghost, being a bit freaked out, learning a bit more about Dr. Zorba or his fortune, then leaving the room only for the film to cut to another character and the exact same thing to happen again. The third act is a little loose, but one of the charms of these gimmick films is that you're kinda there for the gimmick, so the story doesn't have to be deep as long as the gimmick works well and the story is entertaining. Usually I'm all for complex multi-thread narratives, but here, I think it would actually subtract from the main selling point of the film. It'd kind of make the illusiono a bit of a hindrance rather than an enjoyment, as I'd be getting invested in the film and then every 5 minutes I'd have to stop what I was doing to have a spooky viewer moment and then get back to remembering all of the plot threads. This is just a quite neat, family-friendly, spooky haunted house movie. I think it does what it does well. The pacing is almost breakneck and its 80-ish minute runtime really just flies by. The only aspect of this movie that I can't 100% put my finger on whether I love or loathe is the occasional instances of gee willikers style nuclear family dialogue. I'd say there's a 50-50 split in this film between what would be considered quite modern acting in terms of naturalistic flowing dialogue between characters that doesn't feel forced or written, and dialogue that was clearly born of the 50s that feels stiff, is full of weird uber plastic squeaky cleanisms that were typical of television and film at the time. On the one hand, that kind of dialogue just feels so right for this kind of movie tonally, but on the other hand, by the halfway point whenever one of those kinds of lines cropped up, I really wanted to take whatever cast member uttered this plastic and shove a rolled up script in their golly gee willikers, if you catch my drift. I also have to say at this point, the ghosts themselves are all pretty good fun. Some are a bit rubbish, others are ludicrous. One of the ghosts is just a Catherine wheel. The ones I liked were the ones that tended to border more on the absurd or the distinct than anything else. I loved the chef because even in death they couldn't kill his most excellent moustache. I like Dr. Zorba, who looks horrifyingly detailed. I like the lion ghost because it's literally just a lion. The ones I'm less inclined towards are the skeleton ghosts, which are a bit rubbish and just scream dollar store Halloween decorations, and the Catherine wheel ghost is just really rubbish too. They aren't perfect, but they're most definitely not anything like the 2001 remake counterparts. Those ghosts would kick these ghosts' arses. But I prefer these ghosts, I think. I find them funny. The writer of this film was Rob White, a regular collaborator with William Castle, who wrote some of his best known pictures, including The House on Haunted Hill, The Tingler, and Homicidal. He's a pretty solid writer who was able to read a scenario and tailor a script appropriately to the audience it was playing for. With this film, he tailored it to be light and entertaining, but his later works in film, like Homicidal, would also show that he was capable of writing much more intricate works. And personally, I'm a really big fan of his style. He unfortunately passed away in 1990 at the age of 81, but he's left behind a hell of a legacy, and I highly recommend you check his other works out sometime. I'll also take the time here to talk about Castle. He was the director and producer of this film, and his career spanned from the 1940s right up until his untimely death in 1977 at the age of 63. From the 40s through to the mid-50s, Castle predominantly worked in the field of noir, westerns and adventure movies. However, a brief stint in science fiction and horror-based TV programming kick-started a campy career in horror, family comedies and murder mystery movies, and mixtures of those categories, that would follow him right up until the end. While he was proud of his work in the field of gimmick-based cinema, it eventually grew to define him, so much so that he actually ended up losing work as a result. Most infamously, he was originally lined up to direct Rosemary's Baby, but his links to schlock B-movie cinema ultimately gave the studios cold feet, and so they awarded the position to Roman Polanski instead. They did let him cameo though. He worked in all fields and explored most genres, and with over 65 directing credits to his name, well, he was kind of a dab hand at this. And here, he was in his element. The direction is really quite lovely in this. Sequences are well crafted and the cast utilise their space well to create quite deep-looking shots that are constantly moving and rolling. Castle consistently keeps his cast moving, and it's especially impressive to see the foresight and planning used to pull some of these double exposure shots off. There's some wonderful use of lighting in this film too to create genuinely moody and atmospheric looking shots. Castle was a very big admirer of the works of Hitchcock, and in particular his distinctive style. Castle would imitate elements of Hitchcock's way of presenting himself, but he would also occasionally borrow the odd shot setup and scene setup too. In effect, what I'm trying to say is that some of the better elements of most of Castle's 60s works were either inspired by or half-inched from Hitchcock movies. So on the one hand, yeah, this isn't the most original direction in the world. But on the other hand, if you're going to steal from someone, steal from the best, I suppose. Hitchcock wasn't unaware of Castle and was very complimentary about one of Castle's earlier films, House on Haunted Hill. So much so that it was partially to blame for Hitchcock making the relatively obscure and often forgotten film, oh god, what was it called? It's on the tip of my tongue. Psycho. On top of very decent direction, the Cine 2 is really quite sturdy. For the most part, it's above average and raises this B-movie well above most of its peers at the time in terms of, well, actually looking competent. It's not perfect, there are a few shots here and there that are a little too TV-oriented for my fancy, but then you can contrast this with scenes like Medea being spooked by the deceased Dr. Zorba, and it's clear to see that for the most part, the quality is definitely there. I think the ghost scenes, the Ouija board sequence, and the Medea-Zorba encounter are some of the absolute highlights of the cine in this picture. It's not award-winning greatness, but for the field it's working in, it's definitely a shining example of campy, entertaining, and cheerful cinema made with clear love and craft. The soundtrack is gorgeous. I've been watching Indicator's Blu-ray releases of these movies, and I don't know where they've sourced the audio tracks from here for the restorations, but they're absolutely crystal. They sound immaculate and they're perfect for this movie. It's all string arrangements, full orchestral pieces, it's totally out of sight and really sets the tone and vibe of the film in the best possible way. I defy anyone to think of a better opening track for this film than the one they chose. It's just really great, a solid piece of work from start to finish. Finally, performance-wise, it's okay. The script, as mentioned, is a 50-50 split of quite nice dialogue and quite stiff stuff, and I'd say that the cast react to this about as well as they can do. Rosemary DeCamp is fantastic as the semi-frustrated housewife Hilda, with a performance that's got a nice humour and a great sense of self-awareness to the corniness of the script bubbling just under the surface. She never breaks the performance by being overly hamtastic, but that line is so wafer thin that she regularly dances dangerously close to just overdoing it. She's great through all of this. Margaret Hamilton is also excellent in her role as Elaine the housekeeper. Due to a coldness and steely personality, Buck often refers to her as the Witch. Of course, you'll know Margaret for her portrayal as the Wicked Witch from the West from The Wizard of Oz. Here she has a subdued performance, which reminded me a little bit of Bela Lugosi's style of cool delivery. It's smooth, fluid, and she really embodies the character. Of course, the witch reference was a self-aware thing, but again, for how cheesy it all is, it's fine. It works well and her performance is totally memorable in this. There aren't really any bad performances in this at all, but there are a few stiff deliveries here and there. It's not perfect, but everyone here appears to be having a good time, and that's the important thing, especially if the film's entertaining as a result. I have a massive soft spot for William Castle films, and I would say 13 Ghosts is an essential watch if you're into B-movie cinema, and particularly B-movie history. It's a unique film from a very unique period of time. While many would try to replicate Castle's work through the 60s and early 70s, you can never quite replicate the distinct vibe of a Castle production. It's the gold standard of B-movie production. Too crap to be taken completely seriously, way too good to be thrown in with the dross that the 30s and 50s shat out. Castle films are an oasis in the desert to someone like me. Cheesy, weird movies made on a reasonable budget with a handmade and interesting look and feel about them. And 13 Ghosts is probably his peak in terms of this genre of filmmaking. With solid direction and cine, an engrossing and entertaining plot, a really fun gimmick, fantastic scoring, solid editing, decent lighting, and a more than solid cast on board, I really like this one, and I highly recommend you pick this movie up, and by extension, if you can afford it, Indicator's William Castle sets at your next convenience, as they're just fantastic value for money. I've loved every minute of exploring these sets, and if you're looking for something to really set your Halloween off with a bang, these are perfect for setting that old-time spooky mood.